Hi, everybody. My name is Alyssa Robinson, and you are tuned in to another episode of Go Beyond. Just as a reminder to you, Go Beyond is an opportunity to dig deeper into Sunday morning's message. And so I'm here with Reverend Daniel Humbert, and we're going to dig into some challenging questions focusing on the book of Acts in chapters 3 through 6. We were reading from chapter 6, but last week in Go Beyond, we ended at chapter 3. And so I want to take us through that a little bit more because we are being challenged to read the entire book of Acts over the next couple of months. And so with that, I will go ahead and jump right in. So the very first question that I have is kind of a tough one. Because it kind of rubbed me the wrong way. So as I was reading through Acts chapter 5, and it talked about a couple of people from the community who did not give their offering to the community. And as a result of that, they were struck down dead. And it's very interesting to read. It was a husband and his wife who intentionally withheld some of their crops from the community, and they were struck down dead. So this is supposed to be like communal living. We're sharing a life together. And so my question is, were people living communally and sharing with each other because they really wanted to out of the goodness of their heart, or because they were afraid that they were going to be struck down dead if they didn't?
I don't understand, Alyssa. Are you troubled by the fact that people just get struck down by God? Is that the deal?
It feels like the guilt theology to me. So it's just hard for me to wrap my head around, like, is this what communal living is supposed to be? Like guilt trip people and punish them if they don't show up?
Yeah. Well, so a couple of things on that. And I appreciate you asking the question because that really is a challenging thought, right? So Acts chapter 2, Acts chapter 4, we get some powerful imagery about communal living and sharing of property and sharing of life and doing life together. The Greek word is koinonia. And then we get into chapter 5, and Ananias and Sapphira are basically struck down because they don't offer the truth, really. It's not so much that they don't offer something, because they do offer something. And, scholars have kind of varied on this over the centuries about what this all means. So I'm just going to tell you what I read into it and what I understand about it. Chapters 5 and chapter 6 of Acts are the beginnings of the breakdown of communal living and of what it means to live in koinonia, this deep-seated community, right? And so the first breakdown is chapter 5, and that breakdown is really more about not being honest and truthful. That is to say, Ananias says, hey, here's everything I got, when in fact it really wasn't everything I had. And then he gets struck down, and then his wife, they talk to his wife, and she says, hey, yeah, that was everything. But it really wasn't everything. And so when they talk to her, they express the fact that, golly, we never said you had to bring everything, but you told us you brought everything and you didn't really bring everything. And so they're not being struck down because they don't share everything. They're actually being struck down because in community, we have to be able to trust one another. We have to be able to honor one another. And so their sin, if you will, is that they're not trustworthy. And so it kind of speaks into the breakdown of community, because of course, if I'm going to live with you, share with you, do life together with you, I've got to be able to trust you wholeheartedly. And that's where the breakdown starts. So by the time we get to chapter 6, the community living is further broken down by what I'll refer to as sort of a class distinction, or a new versus old distinction, because in chapter 6, the breakdown seems to be between the Greek-speaking Hebrews, the Hellenists, and the Hebrew-speaking Hebrews, who are more long-standing in the faith and have followed all the dietary regulations, whereas the new Jews, these Hellenists or these Greeks, they've been acculturized to the Greek system, if you will, and they're new to the Hebrew tradition, i.e. also into the faith of Jesus. And they feel like they're being not treated fairly, or not getting sort of all the goods, if you will. And so that's when they start to complain. So that's what's taken shape here, is a breakdown in trust, a breakdown in community, and then a breakdown in human relationships. That's what's going on.
So, and I'm glad you brought up the Hellenists, because that leads to the understanding of who are these people.
Sure,
I
sure.
could have put that question a lot more eloquently, I
Yeah,
guess, but what do we know about the Hellenists?
yeah.
Does that sect of Christianity still exist? Did it evolve into something else?
Yeah, it's not really a sect. It's unfortunately most modern day English translations do a better job of describing the Hellenists, but the New Revised Standard, from which we read Sunday, and a couple of others use the word Hellenist, but virtually all the other modern English translations simply refer to them as Greek speaking Jews. That's what it meant. So they were new converts to the faith and had already been acculturated to the Greco-Roman Empire. And so they were more acculturated into their environment, and they didn't know Hebrew yet. They hadn't learned it. And so they're new converts. They are new to the faith. And so they likely had not been circumcised, for instance, because they're sort of leading into this. They may have been circumcised, but it's really just about newness to the faith and Greek speaking only. They haven't been faithful long enough to speak Hebrew, because at this point, everybody who becomes a follower of Jesus has first become a Hebrew, that is to say, a Jew, and therefore they're living into their Jewishness first. And so they're new converts more than anything. It's not a sect. It's just a group of people who are new to the faith.
So the story that we were reading in Acts 6 was basically the Hellenists come forward to the leaders of this movement and say, hey, we're not being taken care of. And they specifically call out their widows. Their widows aren't receiving the food that everyone else is receiving. And so they are worried that they're, being ostracized, that they're not being honored in the same way that other cultures are being honored, and they're feeling very left out. And as a result of this, the leaders come together and they say, well, you know what? Let's appoint some people, because the way that they phrase it is like, we're too busy, spreading the word of God and praying and doing all these things to be waiting tables. Like, we need to have someone else that we put in charge of making sure that everybody's fed and making sure that everybody's getting, everyone's treated equally. But the title of the chapter is The Chosen Seven. But we know that there are more than 5,000 people gathered together in this community. So were those 7 people expected to make sure that all 5,000 are fed and taken care of? Like, what were those responsibilities of those 7? Were there more than 7 that they just didn't name?
That's a great question. And part of what I love about chapter 6 is it is a brilliant strategy for growing the church. And the strategy looks something like this. Number one, we need to identify we've all got gifts, and some of us have gifts for preaching and teaching. That's what the apostles were saying. It's an unfortunate phraseology when they talk about, not waiting tables. That really wasn't derogatory or condescending. It was a cultural way to describe servanthood. And it really does sound bad in modern day world, but it was really a very well accepted and well understood phrase that meant some of us are going to teach and preach, and some of us are going to serve. Some of us are going to do what needs to happen here. And so the strategy turned into, let's own our gifts. Let's recognize we each have roles to play. And we currently don't have enough servants. We currently don't have enough diakonos. That's the Greek word, and it means servant ministry. And so these 7 that they choose, have some certain qualities. They got to be full of wisdom. They got to be full of the Spirit. They have to be prayed over, and they have to be discerned as to who they are. The second part of that strategy that is not clearly stated, but I believe strongly is what it was geared for, was those 7, as you rightfully point out, they're not going to be able to take care of 5,000 people by themselves. But I reckon what they did was they then in turn recruited others. They became facilitators. And so they became overseers, if you will, who directed those ministries so that 5,000 or more people could be served. And of course, again, the point was, let's make sure we don't have these distinctions between the Greek-speaking Hebrews and the Hebrew-speaking Hebrews. Let's take care of everybody together. And the only way that we can do that is by serving other people. And the only way we can serve other people is if we organize ourselves according to our giftedness. And so part of what I love about this story is it's a strategy for being the church. And the way we do that is acknowledging our giftedness, but it's also about serving other people. I mean, I reckon as well that it's not just the 5,000 who will be served eventually, but it'll also be the community, non-believers as well. And that the church's strategy for growth was to serve others. It wasn't so much about evangelizing. That would come later. I mean, when we get to chapter 8 next week, that will come. But the initial strategy is to serve and to provide for other people. And I think that's something we need to learn in this re-church strategy ourselves is we've clearly left the building, right, during this COVID time. And a part of what we're recognizing is real ministry has very little to do with the building. Real ministry has to do with serving other people and helping other people to know that they are loved and cared and provided for. And the first century church knew how to do that. So they strategized.
Well, and I think that another thing that is very similar today is I imagine that we still have people who feel like the Hellenists in the church today. We as a church, not intentionally, maybe sometimes intentionally, but mostly unintentionally, forget to recognize people, or there's a specific group that gets left out of the conversation or of the serving or whatever it is that we're doing. And so I think that the Hellenists are a good reminder of, we need to listen and we need to pay attention when people don't feel heard and don't feel like they're a part of things and respond to that. But I'm just curious, in your view, who would you see as the Hellenists of the church today, who are kind of raising their hands and saying, help me out here. We're not being treated equally.
Yeah, I mean, you could name several different categories of folks, if you will, but I will just sort of generally lump them like this. Anybody who's new in the life of the church, whether they're members or not, just anybody who may start to come to the church or may start to participate in one of our life groups or may start to participate in one of our servant ministries. I think those are the Hellenists. They're the newbies, if you will, and they don't know how we do things, or they don't know how things operate. And we, in a larger church setting like Treach, tend to assume everybody knows how things work. Everybody knows how where to find stuff, whether digitally or otherwise. Everybody knows how to get connected in a small group or get connected with a ministry. And we tend to take that for granted. And so I can well imagine that for some people, they feel like, golly, how do I get connected and how can I be in ministry? That's the Hellenist I would identify. And we need to be better about that. Number one, in my opinion, streamlining our ministries, not trying to be all things to all people, because when we do that, we get so bombarded with opportunity that people get overwhelmed. It's like standing on a grocery aisle full of cereal and there's 50 million options and I don't know what to do. Right? In the church, we just need to be a little more focused, and we need to be a little more diligent about welcoming folks and helping them get ingrained in small group worship ministry and just direct them, because otherwise you can feel really lost and feel as though you therefore are a second-class citizen because you don't know where things are, how to achieve things, or how to get stuff done. That's how I would reckon that.
Well, that's about all that we have time for today, but thank y'all so much for joining us on this episode of Go Beyond. As a reminder, we are here every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 12:30 to go live and dig deeper into Scripture and challenge the message that we're hearing. Obviously, I have a lot of questions. If you have a lot of questions too, remember, you can go to tmumc.org/go-beyond and you can submit your questions. You can also comment on Facebook anytime that you have a question or a comment that you want to, I'm checking Facebook while we're watching right now. So I see you and I see what you're commenting and we want to be able to respond to that. So for all previous episodes and to get more connected, go to tmumc.org/go-beyond.